So I thought we'd give this article quite a good try today because I think this is something that has sort of been missing from the conservation conversation when it comes to our HGV driver shortage. We very, very often hear from, of course, the big wigs in the road haulage industry or some other big logistics industry wide body. But they have very often not been at the ground level actually driving the HGVs. So this article today that we're going to go through actually comes from someone who has that experience and talks about a greater, wider industry than I think previously we have seen before, or previously that we have talked about in the past. So I think I found this quite interesting and compelling. Um, the way that he talks about the industry, because again, like I said, it's something that I think has been very much absent for the conversation. And I like to use my channel very often sometimes to give those voices out to a wider public who may not have heard these arguments before. So, before we do go jumping into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So, let's go diving into this story today then. So, this comes from the Central Byline Times, which is sort of, I can't remember where they put their boundary, but central, somewhere in the middle of the UK. But anyway, so the title of this is The HGV Driver Shortage and the Wider Industry. What got us here? Having lacked any interest in school and subsequently messing up my A levels, I left school at 17 looking for a solution. I joined the Royal Navy. And within my 4 years of service, I trained as an aircraft technician and completed a very brief tour of Afghanistan during the peak of operations before leaving the forces around 2006. With very little idea of what to do next, I started working as a laundry van driver in central London. This was very much my first experience and exposure to heavy commercial vehicles, the industry that I would later become part of. So over the years, I both gained my Category C and Category C+E licenses, the heavy rigid and heavy articulated goods vehicle respectively, and then worked my way through various training, management, and finally consulting and lecturing positions. In 2019, I've set up my own business, which I am still expanding. And this has enabled me to greatly phase out the driving work. Although during the pandemic, I found myself having to drive again full time out of necessity. Now I have that 1 month left of occasional driving shifts, and I will be stepping away from the driving seat for good. I appreciate this position is one of privilege to some extent, as very few drivers experience development opportunities beyond the driving seat. But I've had to work exceptionally hard to build the business to a point where I can now step away from employment. Currently, the UK has a shortage of approximately between 90,000 to 100,000 heavy good vehicle drivers. But this is not a new phenomenon. The HGV industry has suffered for at least the last 15 years with shortages. Yet, it is only hitting the news now that the public are seeing shortage on the shelves. This is an industry screaming for help in the face of being unable to recruit new drivers. And there are many causes for this shortage. COVID-19 has been a big factor. Lots of EU drivers returned home to their families before lockdowns were enforced, and many of them even faced an uncertain future, unsure if they would actually ever return due to the restrictions on movement. Driver training and testing has also been affected by the pandemic, as facilities were closed, meaning the industry is now suffering a backlog as well as falling in demand. But what this has proved beyond more significant than the impact of the pandemic is Brexit. Since 2004, when additional countries joined the EU, our heavy vehicle driver workforce has been increasingly made up of migrant workers from Eastern European countries. They appear to possess a work ethic of somewhat different to ours. Many are more willing to work the long hours required by the industry, which in contrasts with the aging, tiring, and the ever more reluctant UK workforce who find the job less appealing. Much of the Brexit campaign was built on the very much misplaced idea of British jobs for British people. In reality, many of the British population do not fully understand what this particular job demands. Despite it being extremely taxing and a manual job, the hours are extremely long, often over 15 hours per day, with very little limited time to rest. The roads are increasingly dangerous, riddled with aggressive drivers. Work conditions are very often unhygienic, with lack of washing facilities and even places to buy healthy food. Socially, the job is difficult too. Family life is difficult to maintain within the long hours, a lack of rest, and even general exhaustion. Many people in the industry do not treat HGV drivers with respect, swearing and threatening them like an inconvenience. And finally, the industry is rife with outdated views of pretty much everything. Every ism you can imagine is present. Awful sexism, racism, general xenophobia, due to a large part of the blue collar demographic, and also partly because it has never been forced to change with the times. HGV drivers must also deal with the highly complex regulations of severe legal consequences from doing the job wrong. For this, drivers can face very high fines and potentially even custodial sentences for making mistakes or even not following the rules, which is that it should be in the interest of road safety. But the salary does not reflect the added risk and complexity for the individual. Until recently, due to a loophole in tax regulations, drivers were paid as if they were, quote, self employed. This was recently adjusted to a point where most drivers now become employers, meaning that many drivers took a very significant cut to their income. And of course, many less scrupulous drivers were paying no tax at all on the back of the RI 35 regulations. So they were hit the hardest when this changed. And they decided to exit the industry. Training and licensing acquisitions do not come cheap to HGV drivers, starting at a minimum of at least £3,000, with no guarantee of the job at the end due to the insurance risk of new drivers. Most drivers find that they have to work sporadically or sit on the license for at least 2 years before even employers will actually even consider them. And on top of the training cost, an additional £2,000 per annum is usually levied at drivers with less than 2 years' experience, and an even higher cost for those under the age of 25. A combination of all the above in varying degrees is responsible for where we are now. But this is not a new problem. We are just experiencing the perfect storm due to the inactivity by the government and industry to address the very well documented problem of the span of over 15 to 20 years. In the short term, we need the migrant workforce back. To do so, the government must be willing to grant visas to those who want to return to the country to live and work. And currently, they are refusing to do this in part to their ignorance of the blue collar working world. HGV drivers should be added to the skilled workers list rather than only HGV mechanics and instructors. They should specifically be added to the shortage occupation list. An issue that is building for at least 15 years is not an overnight fix. To effectively solve the HGV driver shortage, we must look at how post 16 education works. Since the mid 1990s, everyone has been pushed into university, discouraged from considering other industries that require vocational, not academic skills and qualifications. Today, we are seeing the impact of this as the entire sector is necessary workforce is missing. The pay for HGV drivers is also a necessary component to address as well. Many are expected to receive long overdue pay rises. However, this will be very offset with the sharper rise in prices over the coming period. We are already witnessing the initial stages of this, reflected in the increasing price rises of bread and petrol. And in the face of sharp rises of inflation, the Bank of England will likely rise inflation rates in an effort to try and combat that, meaning this will be a drop in the real value of people's spending power. The biggest disappointment is that the supply and demand component that has led to the pay rises in Brexit, that has led to these pay rises, is being flagged as a success on the back of Brexit. The preservation of the job and industry must be altered in what it really is, a vital part of the economy. Conversations about autonomous vehicles are also damaging the HGV industry as well, as they are unlikely to be a very viable alternative to human drivers delivering goods, or at least not any sort of realistic timescale from here. Finally, there must be at least more perks and benefits to the job. Drivers have long lacked support, be it in sick pay outside of the SPP, generous pension contributions, or even mental health advice. These positions need to change. The world has changed, and the way we work and the way we view our lives and work-life balance, the sort of work we desire, the things we buy, how we buy them, and our expectations for delivery services. All these have drastically affected our lives and indeed the transport sector, and we need to accept them for what that means for an important but very long underappreciated occupation. It has been a great shame of my working life to bear witness to departure from the EU, throwing away everything it stands for as a force for good in the world, and the growing division and hatred, greed, and racism in the UK, which I have seen reflected in an industry I had depicted as dedicated a great portion of my life to. I hope for a brighter future, but we fear we are in for a rough ride ahead. Until we can admit to the problems of our doing, we must muster up some solutions to the problems of an industry that we are doing so heavily to reliant on, but not only just becoming aware of. This has been the driver for everything that I have been doing recently. So that, I think, is a very sort of interesting more take on this, because we don't hear like the ideas of the driver as to why this shortage has happened. But again, everything we've heard there is quite normal. But the big changes we did hear about, of course, are the fact that, again, there's a lot of racism and sexism in the industry. That's not surprising. The fact that they are very badly undertreated. I didn't realize, of course, the amount of legalities that a HGV driver would have to face. And of course, it does make sense. But again, unless you are aware of them, you don't really tend to think about it. And I think that now, especially this, and I've said this before on this channel, we cannot go back to the normal that we used to be pre-pandemic. And I think any attempt by either the Conservatives or even officers or workforces or industries that try to do that are going to face some very significant rebellions. And I think, as I've said before, 2022 is going to be hard for a whole lot of people. And I think we've got some serious problems in 2022 that this country is going to face. I don't think we're just going to face a winter of discontent to start up 2022. I expect we could have very much a summer of discontent as well. But anyway, that's probably a topic for another time. But as always, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.